Measure 111. Result of yes vote. Yes vote requires state to ensure affordable healthcare access. State must balance healthcare funding against funding for schools, other essential services. Courts must respect balance. Result of no vote. No vote retains current law. The Constitution does not require the state to ensure access to affordable healthcare. State provides some healthcare access. Summary. Amends the Constitution. Current state law outlines the general requirements for health insurance policies and provides health care for low-income and disabled residents who meet eligibility requirements. Amends the Oregon Constitution to establish health care as a fundamental right. Obligates the state to provide Oregon residents access to cost-effective, clinically appropriate, and affordable health care. Amendment requires the state to balance that obligation against the public interest in funding public schools and other essential public services. If the state is sued to enforce the amendment, the court may not order a remedy that interferes with the state's requirement to balance healthcare funding against funding for public schools or other essential public services. Estimate of financial impact. The financial impact to state and local expenditure and revenue is indeterminate. The measure does not require additional state government revenues or expenditures. The impact of the measure will depend on future legislative action to establish additional health benefits and determine how they will be paid for. Text of measure. Whereas there are many components that contribute to good health, including the ability to respond to sickness, disease, and injury, and whereas achieving the goal of living a healthy life is impossible without the ability to access health care, and whereas health care should be available to everyone, and whereas the lack of available health care is a barrier to opportunity, success, and quality of life, and whereas Oregonians should not be divided between those who can afford to be healthy and those who cannot, and whereas Oregonians should not be divided between those who have hopes and dreams and those whose sickness, disease, or injury robs them of their hopes and dreams. Now, therefore, be it resolved by Legislative Assembly of the State of Oregon, Paragraph 1. The Constitution of the State of Oregon is amended by creating a new Section 47 to be added and made part of Article 1, such section to read, Section 47, 1. It is the obligation of the state to ensure that every resident of Oregon has access to cost-effective, clinically appropriate, and affordable health care as a fundamental right. 2. The obligation of the state described in subsection 1 of this section must be balanced against the public interest in funding public schools and other essential public services, and any remedy arising from an action brought against the state to enforce the provisions of this section may not interfere with the balance described in this subsection. Paragraph 2. The amendment proposed by this resolution shall be submitted to the people for their approval or rejection at the next regular general election held throughout the state. Explanatory statement. Ballot Measure 111 amends the Oregon Constitution by establishing the obligation of the state to ensure that every resident of Oregon has access to cost-effective, clinically appropriate, and affordable health care as a fundamental right. The state must balance this obligation with other obligations to fund public schools and other essential public services. While this measure establishes a new constitutional obligation of the state, it does not specify what the state must do to comply, how that compliance will be measured, or identify specific steps that the state must undertake should this measure pass. If a suit is brought against the state to enforce the measure, a court could not interfere with the way the state balances its obligations to fund health care with a public interest in funding public schools and other essential public services.